That summer, the clear blue sky stretched across the rugged Appalachian Mountains in the eastern United States. A man named Daniel decided to spend his vacation exploring the wild mountain trails there. He had always been drawn to nature, but this year was different. He wanted a challenge, something that would push him beyond his limits. The untouched wilderness called to him, offering both solitude and adventure. Equipped with a sturdy tent, dehydrated food, and survival gear, he set off on a journey that promised to test his endurance. His backpack was heavy, but he welcomed the weight. Every step into the wild was a step closer to the unknown. Yet, what he didn't know was that this trip would not only challenge him but change him forever. Because somewhere in those mountains, fate had something unimaginable in store, something that would defy everything he thought he knew about the wild. Daniel had spent years exploring forests, scaling rocky hills, and trekking through untamed landscapes. Yet, the Appalachian Mountains had always remained an unfulfilled dream, a challenge waiting to be conquered. Towering ridges, dense foliage, and unseen dangers lurked in these ancient lands. He had read stories of unpredictable weather, elusive predators, and hikers who ventured too far, never to return. But to Daniel, that was part of the allure. As he ascended the first stretch of his journey, the crisp mountain air filled his lungs. Sunlight filtered through the towering pines, casting shifting patterns on the rugged trail. Each step took him deeper into isolation, farther from civilization, closer to nature's raw essence. But no amount of preparation could predict the wild's true nature. Out here, man was just another creature, bound by the laws of survival. And soon, Daniel would come face to face with a test no guidebook could prepare him for, a moment where instinct, courage, and fate would collide in a way he never imagined. He adjusted the straps of his pack and pressed forward, unaware that just beyond the next ridge, something was watching, waiting, a silent force ready to change everything. On the morning of the second day, Daniel moved carefully through towering rock formations, his boots crunching against loose stones. The terrain was treacherous, one misstep could send him tumbling down jagged slopes. As he reached a narrow ravine, a faint, desperate cry echoed from below. He froze, scanning the depths. Then he saw it, a bobcat, clinging to the crumbling edge of a rocky ledge. Its sharp claws scraped against the stone, muscles trembling with exhaustion. The drop below was sheer, a deadly plunge into a rushing stream. Daniel's pulse quickened. Wild animals rarely showed vulnerability, but this one was at its limit. Without hesitation, he pulled a rope from his backpack, securing it tightly to a sturdy pine. Testing the knot, he inched closer to the edge, gripping a protruding root for balance. The bobcat's golden eyes locked onto his, a flicker of fear, a fragile hope. It let out a weak growl, uncertain of his intent. Daniel spoke softly, his voice steady despite his own rising heartbeat. He tossed the rope toward the animal, doubtful it would understand. But then, against all odds, the bobcat latched on. Daniel braced himself and began pulling. The rope dug into his waist, the weight heavier than expected. His muscles burned, but he refused to let go. The bobcat tried to climb, its hind legs scraping for grip. But it was too weak. Summoning every last ounce of strength, Daniel reached out, gripping the scruff of its neck. One final pull, and the bobcat collapsed onto solid ground, panting heavily. Daniel dropped beside it, gasping for breath. They sat there, two exhausted souls, breathing in unison. The bobcat lifted its head. Instead of fleeing, it gazed at him, something unreadable in its piercing eyes. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, and nudged his arm before turning and disappearing into the trees. Daniel exhaled sharply, staring after it. He had just saved a wild predator. Yet somehow, for a brief, fleeting moment, it felt as if the bobcat had saved him too. Daniel remained seated, his breath still uneven. His arms ached, his fingers tingled from the strain of pulling the bobcat to safety. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment that had just passed, the moment that defied all logic. The bobcat, now standing on solid ground, didn't bolt into the wilderness like he expected. Instead, it lingered. Its flanks rose and fell with deep, exhausted breaths, but its golden eyes remained locked onto him. Daniel stayed still, afraid any movement might break whatever fragile understanding had formed between them. He had never been this close to a predator before, especially one he had just saved. Then, without warning, the bobcat took a step forward. Daniel stiffened. His instincts told him to retreat, but something held him there. The bobcat nudged his arm, a brief, deliberate gesture. Not aggressive. Not fearful. Something else. Gratitude? The thought sent a chill through Daniel, though not from fear. This was something rare, something that defied the simple rules of nature. And just as quickly as it had happened, the bobcat turned, slipping into the dense foliage. Its tawny coat blended into the shadows, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. A wild creature had acknowledged him, trusted. 3 days later, Daniel continued his journey, winding through dense forests and wading across shallow streams. As night fell, he set up camp near a calm river, lighting a small fire for warmth. The wilderness was peaceful, until it wasn't. Sometime past midnight, a distant howl shattered the silence. Daniel's eyes snapped open, his pulse spiking. Another howl followed. Then another. Wolves! A shiver ran through him. He had read about wolf packs in these mountains, but encountering one alone was something else entirely. Scrambling out of his tent, he fed the fire, hoping the flickering flames would keep predators at bay. But the night air remained thick with an eerie stillness, until the sound of snapping branches made his stomach lurch. Something was moving. Several somethings. His breath hitched as shadows emerged from the darkness. 7 wolves, their lean forms bristling under the moonlight. Their green eyes glowed like eerie lanterns, locked onto him with unsettling focus. Daniel gripped a long stick, holding it like a spear, though he knew it was useless. Running was out of the question. He was surrounded. The pack advanced slowly, tightening their circle, cutting off any escape. One wolf, larger than the rest, stepped forward, the alpha. Its lips curled back, revealing sharp teeth. Daniel's heart pounded. Then, just as the alpha prepared to lunge, a deep, guttural growl rumbled through the night. The wolves froze. Something else was in the darkness. Something just as wild. Daniel's breath caught as a familiar figure emerged into the firelight. The bobcat. Sleek. Powerful. Unafraid. And standing directly between him and the wolves. The bobcat moved with quiet confidence, its sleek muscles rippling beneath its fur. It didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. It simply placed itself between Daniel and the wolves, a silent guardian facing down an entire pack. The wolves snarled, their bodies tense. They hadn't expected this. Neither had Daniel. The bobcat let out another growl, low and menacing. Its ears flattened, tail flicking, a predator's warning. The firelight glinted off its sharp claws, extended and ready. The alpha wolf took a cautious step forward, testing the intruder's resolve. In an instant, the bobcat exploded into motion, lunging with terrifying speed. Claws slashed through the air, a single, precise strike. The wolf yelped, stumbling back, blood staining its muzzle. The others hesitated, shifting uneasily. The bobcat didn't back down. It arched its spine, first standing on end, making itself look even larger. The fire crackled louder, embers flying as the wind picked up. The wolves' ears twitched, their instincts warring between hunger and caution. The alpha locked eyes with the bobcat. A long, tense moment passed. Then, with a reluctant growl, it turned away. One by one, the pack followed, fading into the darkness like shadows retreating from the dawn. Silence returned. Daniel's chest rose and fell, his breath shaky. He turned toward the bobcat, but it was already looking at him. This wasn't coincidence. It had chosen to stay. Daniel stood frozen, his heartbeat still thundering in his ears. The wilderness had its own rules, ones he thought he understood. But this was different. The bobcat remained still, its piercing golden eyes fixed on him. For a moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows across the forest floor. Daniel swallowed hard. Had it truly protected him? The idea felt impossible. Wild animals didn't intervene in human affairs, yet the bobcat had placed itself between him and certain death. Slowly, its tense muscles relaxed. The danger had passed. The night had been claimed. Daniel exhaled, his grip loosening on the useless stick in his hands. This wasn't just survival. It was something deeper, an unspoken connection, raw and untamed. The bobcat blinked once, then, as swiftly as it had arrived, it turned and melted into the shadows. And Daniel knew, this moment would never leave him. Daniel packed his gear as dawn's first light painted the sky in soft hues of gold and crimson. The weight of the past few days lingered in his chest, heavier than his backpack. He had come here seeking adventure, but what he found was something far greater. As he made his way back towards civilization, the wilderness around him felt different, alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. Every rustling leaf, every whisper of the wind carried a presence, as if the mountains themselves were watching. Then, just as he reached the final ridge, he saw it. Perched on a distant outcrop, silhouetted against the rising sun, stood the bobcat. Still. Silent. Watching. Daniel exhaled, something unspoken passing between them. No words, no gestures, only understanding. Then, with the quiet grace of something eternal, the bobcat turned and disappeared into the wild. And Daniel knew he would never be the same.